My granddaughter's quinceañera was the most beautiful party I had ever paid for, and I wasn't allowed past the parking lot. My daughter stood at the door of the country club in a dress I bought, looked at my work shirt, and told me the guests inside were a certain kind of people, and that I'd be more comfortable waiting in the truck. 3 weeks later, she called me sobbing because the bank had frozen the construction loan on her husband's restaurant, and the contractors had walked off the job. "Daddy, did you co-sign the release like you promised?" she asked. And I held the phone, and I felt something cold and clean settle into my chest, and I said, "Now, did I ever actually say that?" But before I tell you how I let my own daughter's whole house of cards come down, do me a favor and tap that like button if you believe respect has to go both ways. Subscribe if you've ever been treated like a checkbook by the people who should love you most. And tell me down in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is, because it does this old man good to know somebody out there is listening. Now let me take you back to that Saturday in San Antonio, the day I finally understood what I was to them. My name is Walt Henning. I'm 66 years old. I've got hands that look like cracked leather and a back that tells me the weather a day before the news does. I spent 41 years in heating and cooling, crawling through attics in the Texas heat and squeezing into crawl spaces full of black widows. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being a man who fixes air conditioners and started being a man who owned the company that fixes them. But you'd never know it to look at me. I drive a 15-year-old Ford with a toolbox rattling in the bed. I wear the same kind of shirts I wore when I was 25, the ones with my first name stitched over the pocket. I never saw a reason to dress up for people who only wanted to see the money anyway. My daughter, Rennie, was different from the day she turned 16. Before that, she was my shadow. She used to ride along on service calls and hand me wrenches and fall asleep in the cab with grease on her cheek. Then she went off to a fancy school I was proud to pay for, and she came back talking about brands and addresses in the right side of town. She married a man named Cole who had a smile like a billboard and a handshake that lasted 2 seconds too long. Cole wanted to open restaurants. Cole always wanted to open restaurants. And for 9 years, every time a restaurant of Cole's went under, the money that bailed him out came quietly out of my account, transferred in the dead of night so that nobody had to say the word loan out loud at Thanksgiving. The quinceañera was for my granddaughter, Maricela. Sweet girl. 15 years old, all elbows and shy smiles, the only one in that family who still hugged me like she meant it. Rennie had been planning the party for the better part of a year, and somewhere in the planning, it stopped being a birthday and became a production. There was a band flown in from Miami. There was a cake the size of a washing machine. The whole thing was at the Dominion Country Club, the kind of place with valet parking and a guest list that gets vetted. I knew the cost, down to the dollar, because the deposit had come out of my account in March and the balance in early June. $41,000 for one afternoon. I didn't complain. She was my only granddaughter. I'd have paid double. So that Saturday I put on a clean shirt, my good boots, the ones without the paint on the toe, and I drove out to the Dominion with a card in my pocket for Maricela, $500 cash, folded up small, the way my own daddy used to slip me money when I was a boy. I parked in the lot and walked up to the entrance, and Rennie was standing there in the doorway like she'd been posted as a guard. She looked good. She always looks good. She always looks good, and she looked at me the way you look at a stain on a tablecloth. "Daddy," she said, "what are you doing here?" I told her I came for Maricela's party. I held up the card. She glanced over her shoulder into the lobby, where I could see the marble and the chandeliers and the people in their dresses and their pressed slacks. Then she stepped outside and pulled the door half-shut behind her, like she was keeping a draft out, or keeping me out. I couldn't tell which. "Daddy, this isn't really—" She stopped, started again. "These are a certain kind of people in there, Cole's investors, the Hendersons, people from the club. It's an aesthetic, you know? You'd be standing around not knowing anybody and feeling out of place, and I'd be worrying about you the whole time. You'd hate it. Honestly, you'd be more comfortable just heading home. I'll make sure Maricela gets your card." I stood there in the heat with the asphalt cooking through my boot soles, and I felt myself getting small. I asked her if my own granddaughter knew I'd been turned away at the door. "It's not turning you away. she said, in that tone. The one that says I'm being unreasonable just by existing. It's just, Daddy, look at you. The shirt. People would ask who you were. It's easier this way. We'll do a little dinner with you later. Burgers, something you actually like. And then the door opened behind her, and a woman with a tight face and a glass of champagne leaned out and said, Rennie, sweetheart, they're about to do the toast. And Rennie turned to go. And just before she did, she put her hand flat on my chest, gentle as anything, and pushed. Not hard, just enough. Just enough to point me back toward the parking lot. I went and sat in my truck. I want to tell you, I drove off with my head high. But the truth is, I sat there for 40 minutes with the engine off and the windows down, listening to the band start up inside. And I watched my granddaughter's 15th birthday through a wall of limestone. At one point, Maricela came out a side door for air, found me sitting there, and her face just fell. She ran over and hugged me through the window and asked why I wasn't coming in, and I lied. I told her I had a service call, an emergency. An old lady with no air conditioning in this heat couldn't be helped. She believed me because she's 15, and she still believes her grandfather. I gave her the card. She kissed my cheek and went back inside to her party, and I started the truck, and I drove home with the worst feeling I've ever had. That wasn't a death in the family. That night, I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of cheap bourbon, and I did something I hadn't done in years. I added it up. Not the love, the money, the 2 restaurants that failed, the down payment on their house in Stone Oak, the cars, the school, the quints, 9 years of midnight transfers. I'm not a sentimental man when it comes to numbers. Numbers were my whole life, and the number I got was a number that should have bought me a chair at any table in this country. Instead, it bought me a spot in a parking lot. I want to be fair to myself and to you, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Walt, you did this. You made her this way. You handed her everything and never once made her earn it. And now you're surprised she thinks the well is bottomless. And you're right. That one's mine to carry. The day I decided it was easier to write a check than to say a hard word, I started building the exact person who would one day push me toward a parking lot. I know that. I've made my peace with the half of it that's my fault. But a man can admit his own mistake and still decide he's done paying for it. Those are 2 different ledgers. And that night, I closed one of them. Here's the part Rennie never knew. The part Cole never bothered to ask about in 9 years of taking my money. Cole's big new restaurant. The one that was finally going to make him a real player. The steakhouse with his name on it downtown was being built on a piece of property I owned. Not Cole. Me. He thought he was leasing it from a holding company called Henning Land and Trust, and he thought Henning was just a coincidence, a common enough name. And in 9 years, he never once put it together that the man whose money he spent and the company whose building he leased were the same tired old man in the work shirt. He'd never asked what I actually did with 41 years of an HVAC empire. He'd never asked what I owned. He just asked when the next check was coming, and the construction loan he'd taken to build out that steakhouse. The loan that was paying his contractors and his designers and his liquor license, that loan had a personal guarantor on it. Me. He'd begged for it 8 months back, said the bank wouldn't lend without somebody solid behind it, somebody with assets. I'd signed. Of course I'd signed. I always signed. But the way I'd structured it, the way my attorney had quietly structured it, was that the loan released funds in stages, and each stage needed my signature to clear. One more signature, in fact, was due at the end of the month. The big one, the draw that would pay for the kitchen equipment, the hood system, the walk-in coolers. Without it, the project froze. The contractors would walk. The lease payments would come due on an empty shell. I sat at my kitchen table, and I looked at the loan documents I keep in a fireproof box in the hall closet, and I thought about a hand pushing flat against my chest. And I made a phone call to my attorney, even though it was Saturday night. Her name is Priya, and she answered on the second ring the way good attorneys do. "Walt," she said. "Everything all right?" I told her I needed her to pull the file on the downtown steakhouse build. "The coal project. The draw schedule," she said. "The next disbursement's due the 30th. You set to sign off on the kitchen package." "Don't put it on my calendar," I said. There was a pause. Pry has known me 12 years. She knows when I'm angry, and she knows when I've gone past angry into something quieter. "You want me to delay it," she said. "I want you to do nothing," I said. "I want you to let the clock run. And I want you to find out, real quiet, what the lease says about a missed build-out and a default. Because I have a feeling my son-in-law's about to learn what a guarantor actually guarantees." 3 weeks went by, and they were the longest, strangest 3 weeks of my life, because for the first time in 9 years I didn't pick up. Cole called twice that first week. Breezy, just checking in calls. The kind he made when he wanted to soften me up before an ask. I let them ring. Rennie texted a photo of Marizella's cake. "Wish you could have seen it," with a little heart, as if she hadn't put her hand on my chest. I didn't answer. The silence on my end must have felt strange to them. The way it feels strange when the hum of an air conditioner stops and the house goes quiet and you suddenly notice all the things that noise was covering up. I spent those weeks doing the things I actually like. I went fishing at Calaveras Lake with an old foreman of mine. I fixed the swamp cooler on the house of a widow named Lupe, who's been my neighbor for 30 years, and who has never once asked me for anything she didn't try to pay for with a plate of tamales. I eat breakfast at the taqueria, where the owner calls me Jefe and means it as a joke and a compliment both. And I felt, for the first time in a long time, like I belonged somewhere. It turns out the people who don't want anything from you are awful good company. Then the 30th came and went, and I did not sign, and the machine I'd built started to turn. It was a Tuesday morning when Rennie finally called for real. I was at the taqueria. I saw her name come up, and I let it ring 3 times, then 4, and I answered on the 5th with my voice gone slow and tired. The voice of an old man who'd been napping. "Daddy." She wasn't breezy now. There was a crack in it. "Daddy, where have you been? We've been calling. Is your phone broken? Are you okay?" I told her I was fine. Knees were acting up, moving slow. "Daddy, listen. Something's wrong with the bank. Cole's loan. The construction loan for the restaurant. It didn't fund. The kitchen draw. The contractors didn't get paid and they walked off the site this morning. The whole crew just left. And the bank's saying there's a missing authorization and Cole can't get anybody on the phone. And Daddy, you co-signed that. You're the guarantor. Did you? Did you co-sign the release like you promised? Because they need it today or the whole thing defaults." I took a sip of my coffee. The audacity of it sat me back in my chair, almost made me laugh. "Did you co-sign like you promised?" As if there'd been a promise. As if a promise was something a man like me got to make instead of just a thing they assumed. The way you assume the sun. "Now hold on," I said slow. "Did I ever actually say I'd sign that release?" The line went quiet. I could hear her thinking. I could hear her trying to remember a promise that never happened. The way you pat your pockets for keys you know you didn't bring. "You," she started. "Daddy, you've always, of course you signed. You're on the loan, you have to." "I'm the guarantor," I agreed. "That's a different thing than having to. A guarantor is the fella who pays when the borrower can't. It's not the fella who has to keep the lights on so the borrower never has to learn how. Cole borrowed that money. Cole built that restaurant. Tell him to fund his own kitchen. He's a self-made man, isn't he?" "I believe that's the word your husband used at the Quince." "I wouldn't know. I was in the parking lot." I heard her breath catch. And then, fast, the pivot. The thing she's always been good at, sliding from one face to another. "Daddy, this isn't about the party. Don't make this about the party. This is hundreds of thousands of dollars. If the loan defaults, Cole loses the lease, we could lose the house. This is, Daddy, this is our whole life. You can't." And then her voice broke for real, and she said the thing she always says, the thing that for 9 years has worked every single time. "Daddy, please, I'm scared, and God help me." I felt it. I felt the old reflex come up the back of my throat. The reflex of a father whose little girl is scared. And my hand actually moved toward my own chest, toward where she'd pushed me. And I almost said the words. I almost said, "Okay, baby. I'll fix it." 41 years of being the man who fixes things doesn't leave you just because you've decided it should. But then I thought about Maricella's face in the truck window. And I thought about a hand on my chest. And the reflex died right there in my throat like a flame under a glass. "I know you're scared," I said. And I meant it, because being scared of the real world is exactly the medicine I'd denied her for 30 years. Being scared is the most useful thing that's happened to you in a long time. Hold on to it. I have to go, baby. I've got a service call. And I hung up the phone on my own daughter, and I sat there shaking. And the taqueria owner brought me a fresh cup without my asking and put his hand on my shoulder. And that small thing from a man who wanted nothing almost undid me more than the call did. What I didn't tell her, what I'd learned from Priya 2 days before, was that Cole had been telling people the steakhouse was already a success. He'd thrown a soft opening party for his investors, the same Hendersons from the country club, and he'd stood up and made a speech about how he built it all himself, brick by brick. No handouts, a self-made restaurateur, while the building he was standing in belonged to me, and the loan keeping the doors open had my signature on it. Rennie had posted the video. I watched it on Priya's laptop. My son-in-law, in a suit I probably paid for, raising a glass, saying the words "self-made," and the room full of the right kind of people applauding. The same room I wasn't good enough to stand in. I'm not too proud to tell you it broke something in me to watch that, but it was a clean break, the way a bone sets better after you re-break it right. After that, there was no more reflex to fight. Cole called me himself that afternoon. First time in 3 weeks he dialed my number, and the charm was gone, scraped right off. "Walt," he said, and his voice was tight. "Walt, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you signed a guarantee. You have legal obligations here. My attorney says you're exposed too. You go down with me on this, so quit being a stubborn old man and sign the draw." I let him run out of steam. Then I said, "Cole, what's the name of the company you leased that building from?" A pause. "Henning Land and Trust." "What's that got to do with anything?" "Henning," I said. "Funny name. Where do you suppose they got it?" The silence on the other end was the sound of a man's whole world quietly changing shape. He didn't put it together right then, not all the way, but he heard something in my voice that scared him worse than the bank ever could, and he hung up without another word. And I knew he'd be calling Priya within the hour, and Priya would tell him exactly nothing except that he should retain his own counsel and review his lease. The lease, you see, had a clause. There's always a clause if you're the man who owns the building and you're tired of being the man in the parking lot. If the tenant's build-out stalled past 60 days, if the premises sat as an unfinished shell in default, the landlord could terminate and reclaim the property and the improvements with it. Everything Cole had sunk into that place. The marble bar he bragged about, the imported tile, the half-built kitchen, all of it would become mine. Not as revenge. As consequence. There's a difference. And I'd come to live in that difference like a man moving into a new house. It took about 5 weeks for it all to come down, and I won't drag you through every day of it, because the truth is, most of a man's reckoning happens in waiting rooms and phone calls and registered letters, not in dramatic scenes. But there were a few scenes, and I'll give you those. Rennie showed up at my house on a Thursday night. She'd never once driven across town to see me unless she needed something, and she didn't bother pretending otherwise. She stood on my porch. The porch of the same little house she grew up in. The house she always called cute. The way you call something cute when you mean small. And she had Marizella with her. She'd brought my granddaughter as a weapon. And that told me everything about how desperate she'd gotten. We're going to lose everything, she said. The house is in default now too because Cole leveraged it. Maricella's going to have to change schools. Is that what you want, Daddy? You want your granddaughter to suffer because you're mad about a party? And there it was again, the move. Hiding behind the child. I looked past Rennie to Maricela, who was standing by the truck with her arms crossed, looking at the ground, mortified, 15, and being dragged into her mother's collections call. Maricela, I said, come here, honey. She came. Rennie tensed up like I was about to turn the girl against her. I put my hands on my granddaughter's shoulders. You did nothing wrong, I told her. None of this is yours to carry. You hear me? Whatever happens with the house, with the school, you call me directly. You and me. And I will make sure you are okay. You will never want for a thing. That is a promise, and I keep my promises to people who don't ask me to. I looked up at Rennie when I said that last part. But your daddy's restaurant and your mama's lifestyle, those aren't yours to fix, and they're not mine to fund. Does belong to two grown adults who have to learn what those things actually cost. Rennie started to cry then, real tears. And I'll tell you something that surprised me. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad. The deep kind of sad you feel at a funeral for somebody who died a long time ago and you're just now getting around to mourning. I'd lost this daughter years back. The country club just made it official. You're choosing money over family, she said. The oldest line in the book. No, baby, I said. You chose money over family. At the door of that club with your hand on my chest. I'm just the first person in your life who ever let you find out what that choice actually costs. Now take Maricela home. It's late. They went. And I stood on my porch in the dark and I shook for a while and then it passed. And I went inside and slept better than I had in months. The restaurant defaulted. The lease terminated. Henning Land & Trust reclaimed the property and everything in it. And a few months later, I leased that same downtown space, marble bar and all, to a young couple, two cooks who'd worked their whole lives in other people's kitchens and saved every dime for a shot at their own. I cut their rent for the first 2 years because I liked the way they kept showing up at 6 in the morning to scrub floors themselves instead of paying somebody. Their little place does barbecue and Tex-Mex, and they named a brisket plate after me, the Big Walt, and I eat there most Fridays, and I have never once been asked to wait in the parking lot. Cole and Rennie didn't lose the house in the end. Cole's people, the Hendersons, the right kind of people, vanished the second the money got hard, the way that kind always does. But Rennie's mama, my ex-wife, God love her, took out a second mortgage on her own place to cover the gap. Because that's what you do for your kid. And I let her, because it was hers to decide and not mine. Cole took a job managing somebody else's restaurant. I hear he's actually good at it, now that it's not his name on the door and his daddy-in-law on the loan. Funny how that works. The man might turn out all right yet, once the world stopped lying to him about who built what. Rennie and I don't talk much. A text on my birthday, a photo of Marcella now and then. The freeze hasn't thawed, and I've stopped expecting it to, but Maricela calls me every Sunday, her own idea, no prompting, and last month she told me she'd taken a part-time job at an ice cream shop and was saving for a car, and that she didn't want her daddy or me to buy it for her. She wanted to buy it herself. I had to get off the phone quick so she wouldn't hear me. Because there it was. The thing I never managed to teach her mother. Showing up 1 generation late, all on its own. I'm 66 years old, and I've built things my whole life. Ductwork and companies and a fortune nobody ever guessed at. But the hardest thing I ever built was the wall around my own wallet. And the hardest word I ever said was no to the one person I'd spent my life saying yes to. People will tell you that a parent's love is unconditional, and they're right. It is. But love and money are not the same thing. no matter how long you let yourself confuse them. You can love someone with your whole heart and still refuse to fund the contempt they feel for you. In fact, sometimes that refusal is the love. Sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is finally stop catching the child who needs, just once, to feel the ground. Don't ever let anyone make you wait in the parking lot of your own life. And don't ever spend your dignity to buy a seat at a table where they're already laughing at you. That's the one thing you own that no amount of money can ever buy back. If this story meant something to you, leave a like so it finds the next person who needs to hear it tonight. Subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell me down in the comments, have you ever had to make the hard choice to stop rescuing someone you love? I read every one of them. I'll see you in the next story. The hand on my chest is the thing I keep coming back to. Not the words Rennie said, not the marble lobby I wasn't good enough to stand in, but that small, gentle push at the door of the country club. Because a push like that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from 30 years of a man teaching a girl, one check at a time, that he is a thing that pays and not a person who matters. I built that hand. I want to be honest about that with you. The way I've had to be honest with myself. Every time I chose the easy yes over the hard word. Every midnight transfer that spared us both an uncomfortable conversation. I was sanding down her character until there was nothing left to grip. Cole didn't make her contempt. The Hendersons didn't. I did, with kindness, which is the most dangerous tool there is when you use it to avoid doing the harder, truer thing. But here's what I learned sitting in that truck, and what I'd hand to you if I could. A person becomes who they're allowed to become. When I stopped rescuing Cole's restaurant, I wasn't punishing him. I was finally letting cause and effect do the teaching I'd been blocking for 9 years. He spent money he didn't earn, so he lost a thing he didn't build. That's not cruelty. That's just the ground finally being allowed to be the ground. If I could teach my younger self anything, it would be 3 things, and they're the same 3 I see waking up one generation late in Maricela. The first is plain decency. The kind that shows up and works and treats the plumber and the investor the exact same way. Because a person's worth was never about the shirt they wore to the door. The second is the good sense to see a thing clearly, even when love is screaming at you not to know the difference between helping someone stand and carrying someone who's decided never to learn how. I confused those 2 for 30 years. Don't you do it. And the third is the backbone to act on what you see. To say the no that cost you something. To sit shaking in a truck and not pick up the phone. Because the hardest word is almost always the right one. Rennie chose money over family at that door, and she got to find out what that choice actually costs, which is the only gift I had left to give her. Marcella took a job at an ice cream shop and won't let anybody buy her car. And somewhere in that, I think the lesson finally landed where I always meant for it to. I'm 66. I spent my life building things out of metal and money. The last thing I built was the resolve to stop building things for people who only wanted the things. Don't wait in the parking lot of your own life, and don't ever trade your dignity to sit at a table where they're already laughing at you. It's the one thing you can never earn back.